the Telegraph journalist Michael Murphy. Hello, Michael. Great to see you again on GB News.
Thank you for having me.
How did this happen?
So Ireland's primarily had two big waves of migration in recent years. There was the Slavic cohort, which came in when countries in Eastern Europe acceded into the European Union, and they integrated fairly well. They're from sort of Catholic European countries. But then sometime around 2016-17, they started to see a larger cohort from, say, the Middle East, North Africa, Asia. And that's come with problems that we've seen throughout the rest of Europe with, things like integration and, language barriers, etc. And it seemed like this was a deliberate ideological project on behalf of certain Irish ministers. One that comes to mind is Roderick O'Gorman, who was the Minister for Integration in 2021. He sent out a tweet in 8 languages advertising the country to the world's refugees, including Somali, Urdu, Arabic, kind of in the manner of an estate agent. He was promising them own door accommodation, things that the native Irish might have been on a housing list for 10 or 15 years and still was not forthcoming. And so this seemed like very much a deliberate policy to try and change the demographic makeup of Ireland in a sort of more multicultural way. And
the Irish population, to put it mildly, is not necessarily at one with that ideology.
No, there's been significant pushback. Last year, there were hundreds of grassroots protests. The government would often announce 24 hours in advance that they were shipping in 100 or 200 migrants into a small rural town or down at heel in a city area. Locals were not given any recourse to object. They were told from on high, these are your new neighbours and you're going to put up with it. And so you saw around the country people out protesting for months at a time. They would, erect barriers, and they would have signs saying Ross Gray, for example, says no, or Coolock says no. And then you start to see a little bit more heavy-handed tactics from the government, where they would send in a gendarmerie-style police force, essentially Ireland's riot police, to, on some occasions, beat them back with riot shields and pepper spray protests that turned violent.
I mean, presumably Ireland, like the United Kingdom, has limited schooling, housing, healthcare facilities. So the numbers we're talking about, the population increasing by 3.5 percentage points in a single year, these are likely to put great strain on public services.
Yes, so there's a shortage in Ireland of around 250,000 homes, which is in part why the Irish situation is such a tragedy, because Ireland never really had migration on this scale from the places that we're talking about, and it decided to actively advertise itself amidst a housing crisis, amidst services already on their knees in many parts of the country. The number of hospital beds in Ireland has decreased almost by 30-40% in the last few decades. Incidentally, as government coffers have ballooned over the same period. And so many Irish people feel like they're not being prioritised by their government.
There's a feeling, is there, of an elite around government which doesn't have much connection with the concerns of local people who find that they've got new neighbours, who find they've got strain on public services. Oh, and in many cases, by the way, because the hotels are filled, the tourism in an area is killed off because the asylum seekers are in the hotels rather than holidaymakers.
Yes, so the elite that you're referring to is sometimes called official Ireland. It's a class of people who would...
It's what we call the blob, perhaps.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's a class of people who would be well insulated from the negative effects of mass migration. They might see a tech worker from India or, a friendly barista serving them their cappuccino in the morning, but they don't see the underclass that are being imported en masse, who are milling around small rural towns or already deprived inner city areas with nothing to do, nowhere to go. Oftentimes, they're disproportionately young males. We know that around 50% of these people have been young males from countries like Afghanistan, Somalia, in other words, some of the most dysfunctional regions on Earth. And they've expected them to just sort of integrate and inhale the air of Ireland and become as Irish as anybody else. And this is, I think, an experiment that we've been running in Europe for the last 50 years, and the results are in.
And curiously, Ireland literally can't control migration because, of course, there is no border between Northern Ireland and the Republic.
No, you're quite right, Michael. The government has pushed back on the idea that lots of unvetted single males are pouring into the country by saying, it runs checks of various kinds. But we know that to be untrue. The majority of migrants, as you rightly point out, are coming in from the northern border by the government's own admission. That's around sort of 85%. Now, last year, a lot of the migrants arriving in Dublin Airport had destroyed their travel documents en route. The Irish government claims to use certain European databases to check for criminal or terrorism-related backgrounds, but we know that, from my research, I haven't seen any evidence of them using that database for criminal background checks once. So the concerns of the Irish people about unvetted migrants are legitimate.
And it's interesting because, when we try to think how the French must feel about the boat people leaving France for Britain, I suppose the British will also not feel too sorry if quite a lot of asylum seekers are leaving Britain for Ireland over the borderless border.
Well, I suppose there is an irony in the fact that it was at Dublin's insistence that was a borderless border. And so they are, slightly being hoisted on their own petard.
And with a little bit of Shakespeare there, thank you very much indeed, Michael Murphy.